Hey, John,
Yeah.
could you use your trailer voice and welcome us?
Welcome to the Men's Collective Podcast,
That was legit.
where we talk about men and collectiving together.
Beautiful.
That was
The podcast that brings men together to talk about manliness, masculinity, fatherhood, sonhood, and
Perfect.
that. We'll see if that one sticks in. It might. I'm not sure if that's going to be explicit or not. On I don't know. If that'll become explicit.
We'll find out.
We'll find
and
out.
just bleep it out, and then they'll have no idea what I said.
Yeah.
And
I'll bleep it out. Yeah, I'll do something. All
right, I love
clap.
it. No,
So everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the Men's Collective Podcast. So excited to have my good friend Jon on, and of course my co-host Pierre. Some exciting news before we jump into the topic of today. My good friend Jon from Whole Parent recently released a book. And I'm going to have him hold it up here. Those that are listening, you can't see this, but you should just jump on the video podcast. There it is. It's called Punishment-Free Parenting. And he is so kind and generous. He's going to be gifting 3 books away, signed, that if you want to win one of these free copies of Punishment-Free Parenting, which is how would you say, a science-based approach to parenting, I guess is a...
yeah. So the subtitle of the book is The Brain-Based Way to Raise Kids Without Raising Your Voice. So I think that that's probably the most accurate description of the book. It's neuroscience, it's practical therapy advice, it's cognitive behavioral therapy based, but with an interpersonal neurobiology twist. So understanding how your brain physiologically and anatomically functions. And yeah, the point here being that we can raise kids more effectively, and that we actually know the tools that we can use to parent confidently, which is, I think, what all dads want.
It's like the perfect blend of the book that I wanted to read years ago that is now out. So I'm so glad that Jon finally wrote this book. I know it was a work in progress. And so we wanted to give away a few free copies to a man in your life. If you're a mother, a sister, a wife listening to this podcast, and you have a husband, dad, brother who's raising kids, if your dad listening, soon to be dad listening, this is a book for you. So we're giving away 3 copies, and to enter, real simple. You got to leave a review of the podcast, whether on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, whatever works for you, and email us a screenshot of your review at info@menscollective.co. Again, info@menscollective.co, and you enter in free. If you win, when you win, we will email you to get your address. This, by the way, has to be continental U.S. Sorry for the UK folks, just because shipping becomes insane. So, little caveat.
Can they win in Canada, Travis?
They could. What's the shipping up there? I don't even know. I should have looked this up. Maybe we could get a digital copy to you.
Yes,
we'll do that.
I'm happy to provide a digital copy if you win in Canada.
Okay, let's do that. If you win, or anywhere, we can get you a digital copy, because that doesn't cost us whatever shipping. Because I don't know. I can't do maths right now. And so we're going to be giving away some copies by Father's Day. So the deadline to send the review will be, let's see, by Father's Day. Give us a review. Email us a screenshot of the review, and you'll be entered to draw. Free. Perfect. That's it. We're not going to spam you, because we want you to be brain-based, science-based parenting and be better, because that's what this is about. So anyway, very thankful for Jon for offering that. Very gracious of him. And I think it's just a way to get it into someone's hands, just to read it and share it and to get it out there. Because I think, you know what, there's a lot of simple strategies that Jon lays out in his book that is based on science, it makes sense when you read it. It's just kind of sometimes redefining how we think we need to parent. So anyway, jump into the drawing, totally free. And with that said, let's jump into today's topic. So, Pierre, what's our topic? What are we talking about today with Jon? Why do we have him on?
Well, we're talking about fatherhood. And in particular, maybe we start with what it's like to be a son and how that's impacted the way in which you father.
Well, yeah, I'll add one note here, and that's about the book, because I think that this is important as I jump into this, and this kind of is going to parry into what I'm going to say about being a son. At least to my dad, I think the experience of being a son is unique, because none of us have the same dad, and I mean that, like, if you're listening to this and you sent it to your brother, you don't have the same dad. Right. Like, there was a different, distinct, unique relationship between you and your father than anyone else.
Yeah.
And so even my brothers, their experience of my dad was different than my experience of my dad. And there's so much that goes into that. So none of us have the same dad. So I can only speak to my experience of fatherhood. But one thing I wanted to say about the book before I jump into that is that there are a lot of books. Obviously, Travis knows some of the authors of these books, like Tina Payne Bryson, Dan Siegel. There are lots of books, Stephen Porges, that are about interpersonal neurobiology, about brain-based parenting. I think the thing that separates my book is that my book feels to people, and this is not, I wrote it this way intentionally, but I didn't know that it was going to come across this way until it actually was out in the world and people were responding and reviewing it. My book feels specifically like a book that you don't feel bad after you read it. So a lot of people read a lot of parenting books, and I don't know if you've had this experience. I've certainly had this experience. Even if the advice is great and you agree with all of it and it's super grounded in brain-based science or whatever, or therapy, and it's all great advice, you leave often feeling like, well, I'm going to do maybe 10% of this, and then I'm going to feel like a total garbage parent. And I kind of wish I took the blue pill and just didn't never know what I was doing wrong. I wish that I just didn't know all of the things that now I quote unquote should be doing. Yeah. And I think that the real gift of this book is that it really focuses on, like, don't should yourself here. Like you can do as much of this or as little of this. And I'm going to lay it out in a way that's very, very shame-free. And so when I say punishment-free parenting, a lot of people, a lot of dads, to be frank, will just kind of back off of that. They're like, I don't know about that. And we can get into why I titled it that. But one of the key message of the book is that punishment is a terrible teacher. And it goes back also to how we read the book. So if you read the book and you feel punished by the book, I've failed. So punishment's a terrible teacher, whether it's you punishing your kids or you punishing yourself because you're a terrible parent. And I will say that kind of goes right into, the things that I learned from my dad. I learned a lot of amazing things. I also learned some lessons that I've had to unlearn. My dad died when I was 25 years old. He was 65. He died of small cell bladder cancer, which is an aggressive form of like prostate bladder cancer, which is kind of, it's not the same thing that the former President Joe Biden has, but it's kind of popping up in the news as like, oh my gosh, wait, this like kills people. Yes. And the type of cancer that my dad had was almost 100% fatal. There was very, very few treatments. And he went from being this kind of icon of masculinity, quiet masculinity, but, running 7-minute miles, keeping, working on his house. He was never really working on a car guy because he grew up at a car dealership. And so working on his cars always felt to him like he was going to work. So he didn't really want to do that. His dad ran a car dealership, but certainly like, replacing the water heater, painting the house, like, digging up the backyard. This was this guy, right, that I was raised by. And it went from this kind of quiet version of masculinity to a shell of himself and dead in a year. So a lot of my process of growth as a dad has been looking back on the first 25 years of my life with my dad and going, okay, so at the end of his life, we had this really great relationship. It became, it's very difficult in the last year of life as people get sick and they're hurting and they're lashing out and stuff like that. But I had this great relationship with my dad. But in earlier years, I didn't always have a great relationship with my dad. I definitely went to my mom for things more. I knew that I was going to have the emotional connection. He was kind of walled off emotionally. And it was only later that I kind of received this unconditional positive regard where nothing I could do would really faze him. And he was always on my team. Even when I would make mistakes, he was always on my team. But for him, that was later. So what I really learned from my dad was, wow, all the best learning that came from my dad were in the positive experiences that we had with one another. Yeah, some of those positive experiences were I screwed up royally and I needed to be helped out of a situation. But here comes this guy who's not going to judge me, who's not going to criticize, who might teach me, but in the process is always going to be on my team. The problem for me is that happened much later. So that was basically most of my mistakes after about 16 years old. That was who that guy was. But certainly when I'm 7, 6, 5, and I'm acting up and I'm doing the little kid thing, my dad responded to that triggered. Like he screamed, he yelled, he like didn't know what to do. And so really the evolution of my relationship with my dad in many ways taught me how to be a dad. And I just looked at towards the end of our relationship where so much of this was good. I say that he's my best friend. Like so much of it was good. And I look at the end and I go, yeah. And had this been from day one, which by the way, my dad is a brother, and what I experienced growing up for my cousin, obviously I wasn't in their home, but was kind of the best versions of my dad was kind of how his brother was with his son. So I saw actually a vision of this. They both grew up though in a home that had some yelling, that had some shame, that had some punishment. And so there was a lot to deconstruct, but also I have really learned the best lessons out of that. Now, this guy was also, like I said, the guy who would come home and if the house was a mess, he would just start screaming and fire off. And, he'd pick up your toy and act like he was going to throw it through the window, and he'd stop himself short of that. But a lot of frustration. This is also a guy who worked and really built, even though I think he himself saw his identity as like being a family man, the hours on the timesheet don't lie. And so there was definitely, as I got older, he went into work earlier and earlier. He got home from work later and later. Part of that was that he was at this company that was growing and expanding, and he wasn't delegating things. And that was one of the things that I've struggled with as well. He beat himself up for every single mistake. That's something that I've struggled with as well. And so it's a melding and it's an enmeshing. And, when somebody dies, especially, we tend to often over romanticize them and say, well, they were all this one thing. They were all their positive experiences. When I think very realistically, my dad was an amalgamation, as all of us are, of mistakes and victories and defeats and, his own baggage and things that he died without ever resolving and things that he grew and he resolved. And I think that that is, if nothing else, I saw a person who in his relationship with me changed. And I don't know if it's just that I changed into a person who was easier to empathize with for him. He was just closer to that stage of life, and so he understood it. Or if actually through aging, he just chilled out and started realizing, hey, like I don't have to take this as quite as seriously. And when I look at my brothers, I think it's probably a combination, because I'm 7 years younger than my next oldest brother. And I certainly felt like there was an aspect of like a dulling of the edges of the person who my dad was as well. And my brothers did some of that work for me. They did some stuff that made a lot of the stuff that I did not seem so bad. So I think that was also a piece. We learn from all the men in our life, and sometimes that looks different ways. So certainly my dad gave me the basis. At least I'll say this: at least he parented me with enough thoughtfulness and consideration that I felt that it was not like a disrespecting or desecrating his memory to parent differently. And that's the thing that I'm asked all the time on podcasts and on just TV spots is like, well, if you had this great relationship with your dad and he punished you, like, why? Well, how could that be? I thought punishment was so bad. And it's like, well, no, actually, like, I know that he would want me to do even better. Like, that's actually the most honoring thing. So, yeah.
Beautiful.
Hearing that, very much an integrative, holistic way of looking at your father and the amalgamation and combining and seeing the growth areas, the mishaps, and kind of the humanness, and learning and taking that, even identifying some areas that are similar to you and your father that you're growing in still. And I really resonated with what you're sharing too, of this view similar to my dad, in a way that my dad is still alive. So that's the difference. But definitely when I was younger, there was a phase when there were some definitely things that were harder, disconnection. I think he was burnt out for a season for sure, which then led to some, during especially junior high school years. So it was a reverse. Almost when I was younger, I felt I had really good memories. And then junior high school was more of even early 20s was actually a harder time with my dad.
I think that's actually more typical.
Yeah.
I think that's more typical because of the way that the teenage brain works, right?
Yeah.
Like the teenage brain is rebellious.
Yeah.
Like at its core, because it's autonomy seeking. And I love Dan Siegel talks about this in Brainstorm, which is his book on teenagers, but he talks about how like evolutionarily teenagers have to separate from their family of origin so that like the species doesn't wind up inbreeding and they don't wind up like marrying their sister or something. And that aspect of like, I have to push away for a lot of men who are, I think, actually less secure than my dad was.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to put that on your dad, but I think that one of the things with my dad was that he saw independence and pushing away and, you know, self-reflection and like these self-expression as ultimately positive things. And so a kid doing those things, insofar as they were still generally in line with his values, which I kind of always stayed in line with his values, but by and large, like macro, he was able to do that. And I wonder if that's what was going on with your dad, where it's like the teenage years come out and it's like, no, don't define me, versus like a 7-year-old doesn't general. I mean, there's some defiance, but it's not like that.
Yeah. I think there was some, you know, because we've had some conversations. We're actually probably the closest we've been as far as a pretty authentic relationship now. And he's changed a lot too. I think age, and I don't think you mentioned earlier about age. I think sometimes it could help. And sometimes I think it could lead to more rigidity for people. My dad, I think we had a season where we weren't talking to each other. I took a step back, long story short, to various reasons. And my parents separated when I was in high school, senior year of high school. So that also was part of like the disconnect between my dad and our relationship. So that had a big impasse and rift. But then when we started meeting again, it's like I began to hear his story. And what I realized is during that season 2 of junior high school, not only was I seeking autonomy, but he was also going through his own stuff that I wasn't privy to as a kid. You know, you're not, which makes sense. He wasn't telling me everything in his head, but I'm like, oh, that makes sense. As an adult, I can now hold the tension of like, okay, during this difficult season you're going through, I also felt some of that in our relationship, which was hard, but now I have this awareness and empathy and curiosity as to now the why. And so it enabled me to kind of heal, and he took responsibility. So we did a lot of forgiveness work too. So there was a lot of stuff that happened. So just to say that the age and the context in which we grew up in, I think do matter. Absolutely. I think it's a big piece. And to be able to step back and have this approach. And sometimes we're not ready to step back. You know, we're not ready as men, as dads, like, can I hold that? And can I view the good, the bad, the ugly, and hold all that tension? Sometimes it's really hard to do. Really difficult, depending on, like you said, everyone has a different dad. And so there's differences.
And I think, that's not, I think we're not where we're planning to go with this episode, but I guess we don't really have a plan, but I will say, I am one who believes that age almost always softens people, provided that the brain stays, you know, working, right? Like obviously dementia and things like that can lead to some kind of sharpening in ways that are not really that person, right? But I think age throughout history has always softened people. And you just see that wisdom coming forward, and you see that patience coming forward. And there's hormonal reasons for that and lots of different things, right? Social reasons. And I think for the first time in history right now, we're seeing age lead to rigidity, because age is coinciding with this rise of like misinformation and cult identity and siloing and political like spiraling and social media. And so for like the first time, you know, a person who was 50 10 years ago is more harsh, entrenched, bitter, bigoted even than they were 10 years ago, because even though they're 10 years older, where like, I think for my dad, he went through a more natural progression. He was never on social media. He went through a more natural progression of like, you know, in the early 2000s, he was like such a LeBron hater, like such a classic, you know, like he's from Chicago. He's like such a LeBron hater. And then in the year that he died, there was a situation where LeBron had his house, somebody like spray painted racial slurs on his house. And this like viscerally affected my dad. And he was just like, how would anyone do that? Like, that is just like, I know this guy is kind of like a whiny little crybaby on the court. Like that was, you know, his whole thing. He was like, but that is so uncalled for. And they made him like upset. And I was like, yeah, this guy like 20 years ago just doesn't care about that. Like there's just no way. But I think empathy comes with age when you let it. And I think that the fear for me with talking to so many people about their dads right now is that the dads right now are like at risk. Like they're being like co-opted. Like these 6-year-old men are being like brainwashed and stuff. And that is like, I'm hearing about so many more, like, I can't go to Thanksgiving this year. I got to go no contact. And it has nothing to do with like, my dad didn't do his self work. It's like, no, my dad was a great guy. Like we're the type of people who pulled over and helped people change their tire when I was like, 8, 9 years old. And now like, just, he's taken entire swaths of the population and said like, these people are, terrible and the source of all our problems. And so I think that actually that like, it's great that you have a relationship with your dad, Travis. I think that there is a possibility for a lot of the listeners of like, they experienced this and there's like, oh man, I don't know how that is. And I'm kind of glad that my dad died when he did in some ways, because I'm like, I don't know where he would have gone with a lot of what's happened, but it would not have been representative of him.
Jon, how do you think that may be impacting relationships between fathers and kids now? Just kind of a general sense of divisiveness and othering. And how do we prevent ourselves from going down the road of becoming even more rigid?
Yeah. Man, I wish I knew the answer. I kind of have I kind of have some general things where I think we have to keep truth as truth. And some of that is like empathy is a positive human quality. Right. So like I start here and I just say, if you're becoming more, and it just depends on your religious tradition that you're from or whatever, but you should be striving to be more empathetic. And if you are striving to be more empathetic, I think generally good things are going to happen for you in your relationships. I don't know about you, Travis, in your practice, but certainly in counseling couples, people say, oh, communication. Like, communication is the cry of like, oh, all marriages are just failing because of that. No, marriages fail because both partners lack perspective taking.
Yep.
Right. Like they just lack the ability to see what the other person's seeing.
Yep.
And they just get defensive. And when I see that and I look at like Gottman's work and stuff like that, I go, oh, all of this is just empathy. Like all of this is just an inability to empathize with someone else's perspective and opinion. So I think that's number one, is just keeping empathy as kind of the thing of saying we need to continue to foster empathy. The second thing is to reclaim the most positive aspects of masculinity, I think. And the most positive aspects of masculinity, and I think this is a problem for people all over the political spectrum, is like many men want to be protectors. Like that's like kind of hard coded for so many guys, whether that's social or genetic or biological, like, I don't know. Yeah. But many men want to be protectors, and we need to reframe protection as like protecting your family means not imposing like radical political opinions on your like millennial children. Like protecting your family. And I see this all the time with people in this space of being like, I got to protect the kids of this generation by alienating my own grandkids, by alienating my own kids. And it's like, man, do your work at home first.
Yeah.
Like that. I think that's like, if you want to be a protector, I think that's great. Start with like, protecting the peace and the ability to critically think for your kids.
And I think, to give a shout out to my dad, he listens to these every now and then, which is, I'm very thankful. But Dad, if you're listening, big shout out to you. I've told you this in person as well, but pairing empathy, and I think you're right, Jon, on one hand, when I work with couples, it's not communicate. I mean, sure, communication, but you're right. It's empathy, it's curiosity, it's can I actually listen to what this person is saying without me being activated and being about me in the moment, which is hard to do. Yep. I get that, because we have our pains and we're like, wait a second. And so we jump in. That's why Gottman or Sue Johnson's work is so powerful, because it's really trying to slow things down to try to listen to the other. So that's a big one, but empathy. And then with that, where my dad does really, really well, and this is a big change in him, is that it's a lot of, you said not pushing, like in a, an agenda. And I think what my dad has done so well in this phase of life, and that I have noticed a huge significant change in him, is that it's a lot of listening, curiosity, not trying to fix or push anything. It's a lot of just wondering with me, and it's listening in love, and it's curious. It's, hey, like, if I need help, he'll offer it. If I ask specifically, if not, it's just like, it's asking, it's not pushing at all. And I think that is such a powerful, like, I would say the most powerful thing you do ever as a human, even as a dad, is, especially as kids get older, because when they're little, of course, you're more hands-on, duh. But as they get older into adult relationships, and I see this too with, grown men that I work with, is that, man, if a dad could just listen and hear and be present without pushing, and really offering wisdom when it's asked, and either that or just through modeling through behavior versus saying it, I think that's the game changer. And my dad does such a great job at that right now. I mean, that's like, and I've told him, I think the one thing that a major thing that I've seen change in him since when I was in like junior high school years, early 20s to like now in my 40s, is, man, he listens so well. Like, and I feel that.
Well, I think so. Just to kind of piggyback off of that. So to plug the book, right? So my book is not about like parenting 20-year-olds. It's about parenting toddlers and all the way up to teenagers. And the thing that like, I build it off of this idea of, the first chapter is kind of self-explanatory. The book is called Punishment-Free Parenting. The first chapter is called The Problem with Punishment, right? Like that's where we have to start, by saying punishment's not going to work. But beyond that, the rest of the book, the next 12 chapters of the book, and I say it's 13 chapters, people are like, that's really long. The last 5 chapters are basically one chapter. So it's more like 10 chapters. The next, length of 9 chapters has nothing to do with why punishment doesn't work. Like we spend the next 9 chapters are what to do instead. And actually that was almost the title of the book, was Punishment-Free Parenting and What to Do Instead. Like, instead of punishment. And the 4 kind of keys that I build on to begin with are, number 1, curiosity, like you said, understanding that most of us approach situations with our kids immediately trying to correct instead of to understand. And so understanding has to come first, because ultimately the underlying need, like it's like symptom management, right? Like if you're just correcting behavior, just playing whack-a-mole, and I'm looking for like the underlying need so that the behavior actually stops. And it kind of concludes, that chapter concludes with the idea that ultimately the goal of discipline is not is not obedience, your kid's listening to you. It's self-discipline, your kid's doing the right thing, whether or not you're there. And so that actually begins with curiosity, and switching your mindset from, I am the king of my castle and these are my subjects and they will obey, to, I am a mentor. I'm the smartest person in this relationship. I have, decades more experience than this person. And what do we do with mentors and consultants? We go to them when we have questions, and we actually often pay our consultants to tell us what to do. That's a completely different mindset than most parents, of being like, you have to do what I say because I am the adult and I'm in charge and I brought you into this world and you will respect me and you will follow what I say, versus like, imagine that's like a boss relationship, right? Like your boss is like, otherwise I'll fire you, right? Versus a consultant relationship of saying like, I want to listen to this person. Like every time I go to my dad with a problem, I come away with an actionable solution. Like that, to me, kids don't hide things from you. They bring things to you. Like, so much is better off when you lead not with punishment, with curiosity. The second chapter. So I start with curiosity after the problem with punishment. The next chapter after that, chapter 3, is called modeling. And it's exactly what you're talking about, which is, hey, guess what? Actually, all of our best parenting work is done not when we're even interacting with our kids. I mean, some of it, like modeling apologies and things like that, is also when we're interacting with our kids, but often it's just living in the world in the way in which we want our kids to live in the world. And so many parents operate from this mindset of, I want better for you than me. I think that's a beautiful thing to say. But if you actually want better for your kid, then you're going to have to do better for yourself. And you cannot, it's monkey see, monkey do, not do as I say, not as I do. That, like understand that that's always where this is going to come from. And then we move through the book and we talk about consequences and boundaries and emotional regulation and being emotionally healthy, which, by the way, I think is the most masculine thing, to not let your emotions run you. Like, I feel like that's so beta to like let all of your let all of your unresolved trauma just run your life, and just like, you're just like a little snowflake. You're so out of control all the time because you haven't like processed your trauma and you don't know how to express yourself emotionally. And so you're just like a little crybaby toddler all the time. Like all these men on the internet who like are keyboard warriors, right? I'm like, oh, that's so pathetic. So like there's the emotional superpowers and all of that. And I move through and how to apologize and repair and reconciliation, because none of us do it all the time. And then the last 5 chapters are just like step-by-step framework of exactly what to do with your young kids. Like exactly. And a lot of it is I use a lot of masculine metaphors because I'm a guy. And so I use all these metaphors that moms are like, come back to me and they're just like, yeah, I didn't know what you were talking about with like the whole like sports and like, watching film the next day. And like, I was never really into like, I never played basketball or volleyball or anything. So like, I never like watched film, but like, I thought that was so cool that you use that metaphor. All the guys are like,
yeah,
oh yeah. Like the quarterback's got to get in the quarterback room and watch film. So he knows what he did wrong. So you go back out the next week and play better the next week. And I'm like, that's just parenting.
Yeah.
Like just rewind the tape. How did that interaction go? What could I have done differently? What could you have done differently? And so I use a lot of these metaphors and I give you the step-by-step breakdown, but it begins with this concept of, if we're going to be strong parents, both men and women, moms and dads, but because we're talking about dads, if dads are going to be that figure for their kids, number one, be a person who people want to follow, right? Be a consultant. Don't be a boss. Don't be a tyrant. Don't have your kids obedience because you've demanded it and because you have, you'll strong arm this toddler. So this, to me, that's just so not manly. Like, oh, I'm just going to use my power to get this 3-year-old to do what I want. Like outsmart them, like be a leader who they want to follow.
Yeah.
To do that, you have to be curious. And then after that is actually be the man that you want your child, or, embody the ethics, even if it's your daughter, like embody the ethics that you want your child to grow up into. I think that's key. And if people don't understand that, then they're going to wind up just playing whack-a-mole with behaviors and then hopefully trying to reconcile their relationship over some games of golf when they're 20 or when their kid's 20.
Yeah.
And I think that's what a sad thing. Like we could do so much better, and we can actually lay that groundwork of the relationship that, Travis, that you have with your dad today, that I had with my dad when I was in my early 20s.
Yeah.
We could have had that relationship at 4 and at 6 and at 16.
Yeah.
But we didn't, because our dads didn't know better. And you know what? The beauty is now we do. And so we can.
Yeah. And my dad says that all the time. He's like, you know way more now than I did at your age. He's like, you know so much more. But he doesn't blame that as like, he doesn't use it as a weapon to say, well, it justifies his behavior. It's like, hey,
sure,
I did the best I could. And I totally jacked up a lot of times. And so that I'm learning. He's like, I'm learning now. And so I think what you said is that all the skills that you're teaching in your book too, they apply to adult relationships. Obviously, just modify them, because if it starts with curiosity, empathy, modeling, it's the same stuff in romantic relationships and adult. It's all the same. It's just you shift how you go about it. But we all need to start with curiosity. And so I think, I know it's geared towards young kids and teens, but the concepts actually apply to all relationships at the core.
Yes.
And that's the little Jedi mind trick thing, is that it really does. Even all Tina Bryson's work, Dan Siegel's stuff, even though doing parenting books for young kids, it's the same stuff. It's just how you go about it. Hey, Pierre, wondering, any final thoughts on this before we close out? Any final thought here?
Well, I was most struck by how being a protector doesn't have to come, and frankly, doesn't come most effectively through force or pushing or hardening.
Yeah.
In fact, I think there's a fear among, or at least I hear a fear among men of going to the opposite extreme or softening. And so they might find themselves hardening up. And in fact, you've spoken to this a fair bit, and speak to this in Punishment-Free Parenting about how flexibility can be so incredibly powerful and so protective, and also models how to protect future generations, or how to protect how kids may protect themselves as they age as well. Not being so hardened or closed off to different ideas, but actually engaging in a way that is fluid.
Yeah.
I just look at it as like such a, I kind of mentioned this in passing, but be a person who your kid wants to follow. Like when you look at like the great leaders of the 20th century in the United States, both of industry and these, epic CEOs and thought leaders, and like the thing that unifies all of them is that they weren't these like ideological strongmen. They weren't like these kind of like dictator type people. They were often just the people who everybody wanted to follow. And if you go back to the Stoics, and I don't do this often, but when you go back to the Stoics, you hear that come through, like this ultimate vision of masculinity. That's ancient, is be this person who does not have to insist upon their authority. Like people, the thing that I think parents are so worried about, men in particular, and the reason why they reject my book is, before ever reading it, is that they just go like, I'm not going to let my kids walk all over me.
Yeah.
I'm just not going to, I'm not going to become like, I'm not going to be held hostage by my kids. I'm not going to my kids are going to listen to me because I'm strong. And I'm just, what I will often reflect back to them is, that does not embody strength to me. That you are like people who are afraid of losing authority never had it. Like people who are afraid that they're going to like, oh, well, if I no longer can physically harm my children, they're not going to listen to me. And you are a terrible communicator. Like if the only reason anybody follows you or respects you is because they're afraid of you, like that to me is not a symbol of strength. That's a symbol of weakness. That tells me just right away that you lack the confidence. And that's the thing. Like when I'm out in public and people are like, whoa, you really let your kids like go far from you. Like you don't have them on a tight leash. Like you're letting them, walk around the grocery store, or like they're getting into stuff, or they're, you send them off to the produce section to get bananas and come back, even though it's, it's an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old together. And people are like, oh, they're going to get kidnapped, or they're going to get, they're going to get into trouble, or this or that and the other. I'm like, no, I have so much confidence in the way in which I've parented them that I don't need to control them. Like I have so much confidence in how great of a parent I have been. Again, not because I'm perfect. I screw up literally every day, but because I've done the homework and I've done the research and I really care about this deeply, deeply.
Yeah.
I now have the confidence to go, oh yeah, like I actually. And the example that I use in the book around boundaries is the bike helmet example, where I say my kids always have to wear a bike helmet because I want them to be able to like crash into trees and fall off their bike. And I don't want to have any rules around how they use their bike. I want them to just like go nuts. I want, my kids the other day, like they were doing some work on my house on the roof, and they're ripping off old wood and throwing it down. My kids like got the old wood and they got some bricks and they like built a ramp. And they're going to like, on their bikes, they're going to like totally wipe out. And like, there's road rash. I just know that like pain is coming.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but I have a boundary that my kids have to wear a helmet so they don't have a traumatic brain injury. And then I let them.
Yeah.
Because I'm confident that no matter what happens, I can handle it.
Yeah.
And that to me is inner strength. And I think that when parents get to that point, they realize kids cease to be a burden. And then you can really start to run with your parenting. When your kids cease to be a burden and they start to be a joy, you can really start to run and have a lot of fun. And I just wish that for all parents.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so well said. One thing I will say I'm going to have a conversation with God or whatever you believe in one day. I'm like, why can't humans just be born with like a I know our skull is a helmet, but like an extra layer that just like sheds, like a turtle shell or something. I'm like, that would just be so much easier. Like, just,
do you know the answer to
it.
that, Travis? I can answer that question for you right now,
real quick, and then we'll close out.
Yeah. So the reason why, and it's actually beautiful. The reason why humans have been so advanced, why our brains are more complicated than any other species on planet Earth, why we can be born early gestationally compared to every other mammal, because our heads are so big they couldn't fit through our mother's birth canals if we were actually like full term in the, you know, in terms of like a giraffe or something. Like their brain is born far closer to what it will end up than ours is, right? We're born prematurely in that way. And that's why it takes us so long to do anything. That's why we're little blobs. We're a sack of potatoes until we're like 18 months old, or at least 9 months old. And speaking of, I have a sack of potatoes attached to me, right? But the reason why we don't come with built-in helmets, the reason why we're not born more self-sufficient, the reason why we're not more protected is because we have fathers.
Oh, yeah.
The reason why we're not born more protected is because we didn't need to be.
Yeah.
Evolution, the way that evolution works is that you evolve to have the thing that you need. And the fact that our children are so fragile means that we were built to do this well.
Yeah.
And so if you're like, oh man, like, well, how can kids, why can't they just be more resilient, or why can't they, you know, just be more whatever, like whatever? Because they didn't have to be.
Yeah.
That's actually evidence of how gifted and special we are as a species. And it's actually evidence of, like, the reason our kids weren't built with helmets is because they were built with fathers, and because they were built with mothers, and because they were built with aunts and uncles and community members in a tribe that cared about them. And so that's actually the reason to the question. We actually would have been built. We would have been born with helmets. We would have evolved millions of years later with helmets if we had needed them. But actually our species was able to survive without them because we're so stinking good at taking care of kids.
Yeah.
And so if nothing else, remember, we are the best at taking care of our young on planet Earth by far. And the evidence for that is abounding. Yeah. Not only like infant mortality and all that, but the evidence for that is abounding because we have babies that are far more helpless than any other species on planet Earth. And the reason that we do is because we're so stinking good at this.
Yeah. Yeah. Boom. Way to just powerhouse that at the end, man. I love it. And with that said, if you want to follow up with a book that is all based on this, to get Jon's book for free, review the podcast, send us a screenshot at info@menscollective.co. and you're going to get a copy for free, and then you give that copy away to the next person, and then give it away and just circulate that thing to give you tools, understanding, awareness, because to Jon's point, we are the most important thing as dads, as mothers for our children. And we're also challenged to continue learning and growing. That's the important thing too. I think that we're still challenged to learn and grow and change and go the next step farther for our kids, for the next generation. So there's this continual growth and evolution. So Jon, blessings to you. Thank you for your time and for your gift of the book. Yeah. Anything else, Pierre, you want to say to that?
Thank you, Jon.
Thank you, Jon.
Really,
I'll say if you enter and you don't win, you can still buy the book for yourself.
Yes. And there's going to be a link to that too. If you want to buy one, in the description, you'll find a link to a site that Jon's going to give me to buy that he is aligned with, not another site but a different site. You'll find it. It'll be there.
Yes, I'll make sure that you have a link. And the one thing I will suggest is that if you're a person who doesn't finish books, this is going to be one that you want to finish. So just get it on audiobook. If you got your hands full, you can get a physical and an audio copy if you want, if you want to extra support me, but you can always just go hop on, get the audio version, and you can listen to it while you're parenting.
Yeah.
It's a great resource to listen to while your kids are screaming in the background, because it reminds you to be chill and that you're doing a great job, and how to screw up when you don't, or how to fix it when you screw up. And so, go get it.
I also like the one I do like how to screw up when you don't screw up. I think that's we should add that.
How to screw up better.
Yeah. I like that one.
How to screw up better. How to fall up. Yeah. I do talk about that. I do talk about that in the book. Like honestly, the screw ups are some of the times when we actually parent the best. Like our mistakes are actually our successes. So,
and we need those. We need those screw ups. And that's a strength, right?
Yep.
So, dude, have a great day.